Buenos días, ahora sí ya.
Good morning. So now formally, on behalf of CLAYSS, the Latin American Service Learning Center, we welcome you to the 28th International Service Learning Conference. We appreciate the support of the Pontifical Catholic University of Argentina and our partners at the Ibero-American Service Learning Network, REDIVAS, that is celebrating their 20 years of continued work, and also our global program, UNISERVITATE. We also thank the support of GivePulse, Axion Energy, TICMAC, Food Connection, and Noviduc Publishing Company. We would also like to thank particularly the support of the Secretariat of Education of Argentina that has declared this event as educational interest and has given grants for 6 students to participate in the sessions. We appreciate also the presence of leaders, authorities, youth, students, teachers, partner organizations, the public in general, and all the colleagues from all the countries that are with us today. Today and tomorrow, we will hear international and national experts, and we will have simultaneous spaces on service learning experiences from schools, higher education, universities, and CSOs. We have the presence in this seminar of over 65 speakers from the 5 continents, apart from the guests that are also participants. For the opening of the 28th International Service Learning Conference, we will have Dr. Jorge San Martín, the president of CLAYSS, Latin American Service Learning Center, Dr. Carlos Torrendell, the Secretary of Education of Argentina, and Professor María Nieves Tapia, founder and director of CLAYSS. To begin with this opening plenary session, we will pass the floor to Dr. Jorge San Martín, the president of CLAYSS.
Bueno, buenos días. Estamos en el seminario número 28.
Good morning. I was making the counts this morning. This has been my 7th international seminar and where I'm opening the sessions of these 28 international conferences. As you know, this meeting, in a way, is part of a great week for CLAYSS, because it started on Tuesday with a special program for members of the Global Network and UNISERVITATE, Catholic education institutions that met at the Salvador University. On Tuesday, we also had the working meeting of the Ibero-American Service Learning Network at the Sarmiento Palace, the head of the Secretariat of Education of Argentina. And this network is celebrating its first 20 years, and we celebrate the multiplication of national networks and institutions that promote service learning throughout Latin America, North America, Spain, and Portugal. Yesterday, on Wednesday, at the School of Dentistry in the University of Buenos Aires, we had a new researchers meeting with 150 researchers attending. And today, Thursday, we have this San Agustin room that is full of teachers, directors, principals, leaders, researchers, and youth, the true protagonists of service learning. In this new edition of the International Conference that is still open to the public and it's free, is organized by the great team at CLAYSS that I can attest of all the work and all the engagement they contribute to this. So a round of applause for them. This year, we have the support, as usual, of the Pontifical Catholic University of Argentina and also sponsors. So CLAYSS has private sponsors now for this activity, which is very good. We'd like to thank particularly the Secretariat of Education of Argentina, Carlos Torrendell. He's here with us today. The Secretariat funded the transportation of teachers from 6 schools in Argentina that won the award Service Learning Schools in 2024, and we're going to share their experiences in the various panels and sessions in this conference. We invite the participants from those schools to stand up, and let's offer them a round of applause. And as the tradition goes, we have representatives from all continents. This year, we would like to greet particularly those that come from the farthest, Matthew Ping from Australia, and the big delegation from Asia. A big round of applause also for the delegation of Poland that is visiting us for the first time. And of course, we are happy to meet again with colleagues from Africa, Europe, North America, and Latin America. It is traditional, at least for me, after this space of thanks, to share some personal reflection. In this case, I will make a brief summary after sharing with you a fragment of a movie.
Apparently, none of you have ever seen a new teacher before. I'm Mr. Simonet. Welcome to the 7th grade, middle school, that hellish, shaky bridge you all must cross before you become members of that undyingly enviable high school elite. You may think you can't cross this bridge fast enough. You'd rather close your eyes and not think about it until it's all over. Well, I'm here to tell you that is not an option in this class. Now, this class is social studies. That is, you and the world. Yes. There is a world out there, and even if you don't want to meet it, it's still going to hit you right in the face. Believe me. So, best start thinking about the world now and what it means to you. What does the world mean to you? Ask you another question. How often do you think about things that happen outside of this town? Do you watch the news? Yes? No? All right. So, we are not global thinkers yet, but why aren't we? Because we are 11. Maybe Trevor's right. Why should we think about the world? After all, what does the world expect of us? Expect? Of you. What does the world expect of you? Nothing. Nothing. My God, boys and girls, he's right. Nothing. Here you are. You can't drive, you can't vote, you can't go to the bathroom without a pass. You are stuck right here in the 7th grade. But not forever. Because one day, you'll be free. Yeah! But what if on that day you are free, you haven't prepared, you're not ready, and yet you look around you and you don't like what the world is? What if the world is just a big disappointment? We are screwed. Unless unless you take the things that you don't like about this world and you flip them upside down right on their ass. Don't tell your parents I used that word. And you can start that today. This is your assignment. Extra credit. It goes on all year long. Wait a minute. What's wrong with this? What's the matter? Yes? It's like so. There must be a word to finish that sentence. Someone help her. Weird, crazy, hard, bummer, hard. How about possible? It's possible. The realm of possibility exists where? In each of you. Here. So you can do it. You can surprise us. It's up to the class what it means. Think of an idea to change our world and put it into action.
Well, you may be wondering why I chose a movie that is many years old, that many of you as teachers must have worked on it at your schools. I realized that the scriptwriter of this movie probably had in their hands a CLAYSS paper. Because you see, in a specific subject matter that is social sciences, the teacher challenges the students to put that knowledge into action. But not only that, that action should be able to change the world. So it's not just a project-based learning. It's a learning that changes people's lives. The student that doesn't may pass with a C, it would be a 4 here. But the teacher launches this proposal and doesn't know the reaction of the student, but he dares to it, trying to take the best out of their students. There are also many teachers that just limit themselves to transmitting content. They are lost in the possibility of installing questions and challenges in their students that can turn them into better human beings. A content that can spark the curiosity of the student, or for them to see that what they learned can be useful and somehow change somebody's lives, that's the best way to learn. The students that can incorporate these experiences are individuals that will surely be alert to the others' needs. A chain of solidarity and service can change the reality around them, can have a positive impact on people. So I invite you these days for each of you to be ready to challenge and to challenge yourselves in this task of making the world a better place. Thank you.
Le damos ahora la palabra al doctor Carlos Torrendell.
Dr. Carlos Torrendell has the floor. He's the Secretary of Education of Argentina. Good morning to you all. I'm very happy to be here with you, as I have done it for so many years. Today, I haven't brought any speaking notes, so hopefully Nieves will help me. Sometimes we make mistakes, and perhaps today I will. I just had 2 or 3 simple ideas in my mind to share with you. The first one has to do with what my colleague was just saying, what we were usually discuss here, and what we have been claiming for several years now, in this temporary position, but thankfully, for many years, just witnessing and supporting the work that started first in Argentina and then was exported through sponsorships with different countries across the world. If I recall correctly, this started at the school level and then it moved on to the university and research worlds. I understand that yesterday you had a researchers meeting, as in previous years, and where you talked about service learning research. So that fills me with happiness. As it is usual the case in schools and in families and in social life, you naturalize what happens on a daily basis. But we also have these kind of opportunities, and undoubtedly we don't have large achievements that surprise us every day, but rather small things that may remain invisible at times. And sometimes because of our daily activities or just because of all the stress that we bear on an everyday basis, we tend to overlook them or undermine them. But as we have just seen in this scene, you may change lives in a matter of minutes or seconds. Of course, you have to persevere, you have to overcome difficulties, nobody can deny that. There are different contexts, of course, but there lies the beauty of life, of education, of those bonds that we can establish among us all that allow us to create our society, our communities, and our personal lives. That is why service learning is an optimal opportunity and vocation, because, as I usually say, it unfolds our full being. It allows us to truly learn. Perhaps one of the most terrible dramas in education has been that if you can manage to design a type of learning that takes the heart, the head, affections, emotions, or rather this will be a shallow, bureaucratic, encyclopedic type of learning that may prove to be useful at times, but ultimately will make no change in the culture or lives of people. So service learning is not a methodology. It is the deployment of an anthropological vision that is different and that helps us think about ways of generating true, full education ways, where you do not have teachers just committed to doing some work, but where they become leaders of notable experiences. Students learn with teachers, and at the same time they should make a change in the vision, the practice, the heart, the intelligence, the minds of those that are learners. So in that regard, it's like a goal, a model of what each of our experiences, our pedagogical experiences should be like. Even the most philosophical ones, and that we try to break them down rationally, but ultimately these theologies, these philosophies only become true when they effect a change in people. And I would like to close my remarks with an idea. We are now facing this big challenge posed by the introduction of AI in education. As a historian, I like comparing changes with the introduction of other instruments or technologies over the years. We also had a significant challenge when in the classrooms students started having some textbooks, some school handbooks, but originally teachers couldn't get their students distracted because students didn't have too many pens, because there weren't any. You didn't have any notepads because there was no paper in the 19th century classroom. You just had a small board, a wall. You didn't have maps. You had almost nothing. And people learned how to read and write in that context. One day, the notebooks appeared, the paper appeared, so students could exchange some messages. The first WhatsApp of the time, we tend to forget about that, but that was the case. Then We saw notepads, we started making drawings while the teacher was talking, and now we can do some other things with our mobile phones. Then the manuals came up, so children could get distracted looking at other sections of the manual. Then the mobile phones, computers, and now this more complex technology in these devices that is precisely artificial intelligence. So what do I want to say by this? As usual, as always, and this will always happen in any educational or pedagogical situation, the system is faced with this huge challenge of introducing new technologies, because ultimately it is just another technology. Of course, it is increasingly powerful. So the system has to introduce new technologies in learning, and this is our challenge. And this is not as disruptive as we tend to think. Imagine how disrupted the other technologies that I have just mentioned have been. Undoubtedly, this will be another opportunity for us to learn how to introduce this new technology. Why do I say this in this setting? And I will close with this. I increasingly believe that humankind is always battling against what is extrinsic. That is the type of learning that we described earlier, superficial, operational learning that may prove to be useful or valuable at times, but that is not fully human. So AI can also lead us along the way of becoming more extrinsic, playing outside ourselves, using the enormous power of technology. But at the same time, if we don't incorporate that, if we don't embed that into our experience, necessarily it will not end well. I read an article by Professor Dittel, an economist. It's a very good academic paper, but he's an economist, unfortunately. It was a short article in the La Nación newspaper. I can't remember the headline, but if you search for that, you will find it, I'm sure. And he made some distinctions, something that I thought that was very useful for this occasion. He would say that AI will always be able to work with knowledge. He uses the term explicit knowledge. We may use other names. So AI uses some equations that we don't know of, and everything that is accessible on the internet to generate that knowledge. But it also learns on the basis of tacit knowledge. So we could turn this into wisdom, an intuitive learning that, data take you in one direction, but you know that you have to go in the opposite direction. So he points out that the problem with using wrongly AI, and this is where we come into the scene and where service learning come into play, this will happen because we become increasingly extrinsic, because we delegate everything onto AI and we don't go through the experience. So here lies our challenge with regard to service learning. We can only learn when we go through an experience. That is the big anthropological secret. The fuller the experience, we were discussing about the scope of service learning, how good or how bad it can be, as they studied this at the San Andres University. If we don't make sure that a method or an experience like the service learning experience turns into an experience, if we just make it extrinsic, even if we use AI, that will not be learning in itself. It becomes learning when it becomes a full experience for everyone, for teachers, for students, and for the community, with which we establish a relationship while learning. So perhaps you have planned a session to discuss this. Oh, that's great. Yes, I haven't looked at the program. So how can we introduce AI now without being afraid of it? How can we introduce AI without looking at the extrinsic aspects and forgetting to go through a profound experience? So let me close with this reflection that came to my mind yesterday when I was thinking about today. As you know, we are continuing providing awards to service learning schools, to those schools that are engaged in service learning projects in Argentina. This has taken place for many years. Thankfully, in Argentina, service learning is a state policy, an achievement that we have maintained and grown here. And once again, I'm really moved. I'm thankful because seeing you all here just is proof of how the education system can still touch the hearts and the heads and the hands of everyone. As Pope Francis would say, it's nice to see you all coming from so far away and also from nearby locations. And this conference is one of the most important events in the field of education that we have had for many years in Argentina and also in Latin America and in the world, of course. We have to boast a little bit about that. All right, thank you. I'm very happy to be here with you. I will be able to stay for some minutes. I always try to stay for the first session, but you know that when you are in this position, you don't own your own calendar, so I may have to leave. So thank you again. I'm honored to be here. Welcome. And later on, you will tell me about the results of this conference.
So we thank the Secretary of Education. Having a state policy on service learning, well, I may have started it, but it's also the merit of those that followed it through. So we are thankful for the fact that in a context that is not easy, the service learning program is still continuing. So also thank you, Jorge, our president, and all the board that so selflessly have accompanied us throughout the year. And would like to apologize the president and the vice president of integration of the Catholic University. They were supposed to be here, but they couldn't make it. But we reiterate our appreciation to the university for hosting us. Thank you.
Bueno, dijimos que en este seminario están participando.
So, as we said, in this conference we have over 65 speakers and panelists from the 5 continents and also participants in general. It will be very difficult to make a particular introduction, but let's make an introduction per continent. So we're going to ask those that are here that live in countries in the Americas to please stand up.
Muy bien, muchas gracias.
Very well, thank you. And those who came from Asia and Oceania. Asia and Oceania.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. And who came all the way from Africa to join us today? And from Europe, who do we have here from Europe? Thank you so much for being here in this new edition of the International Conference. Now we are going to listen to critical thinking and citizenship, service learning in challenging times, by Professor María Nieves Tapia, founder and director of CLAYSS, in a dialogue with Miquel Martínez, a pedagogy professor at the University of Barcelona. The moderator is Ezequiel Gómez Caride, the director of the School of Education at the San Andrés University and member of CLAYSS and UNISERVITATE. Good morning again. It's always a pleasure to meet for me and for all the CLAYSS team. This is the most exhausting week, but also the happiest and the nicest week of the year. So thank you for joining. I'm going to start, as I usually do, with an interactive activity, or as we used to say, raise your hands. So please raise your hands, the veterans that have attended the conference more than twice, or much more than twice. Amazing. Thank you. Thank you for sticking with us. Who of you have come here for the second time? Many of you. And who are the first comers? Who is here for the first time? Many. Okay, so a round of applause for all of you. Who have at least an idea of what we mean when we speak of service learning? Amazing. Besides, I know that many of you know much more. And who are now participating or have participated in specific service learning projects? So you're all experts. So as you're all experts, I'm just going to share 4 slides very briefly, just in case some of you need some refresher. But you also know that we like to talk, as Secretary Torrendell said, from experience and not just from theory. And I wanted to start with this experience as homage to our colleagues from the Bethlehem University in the West Bank in Palestine that were ready to come, but they did not obtain the final permit, so they couldn't make it. They were going to share this conference with us. But we have here a colleague from Ukraine, the Catholic University of Ukraine, and Lviv. We know that last night they suffered a tremendous bombing, and we know that her family suffered the bombing. So I thought it was important to start by expressing our solidarity with Palestine, Ukraine, all the Middle East, so many countries in Africa, Asia, and also in our Americas that suffer violence, but mainly these places that are suffering these tremendous wars. But I wanted to share this experience also as a symbol of hope, because even amid the war, as our colleagues from Ukraine have shown, as they show every day, the colleagues from Palestine that yesterday were at the researchers' meeting through a video, it is possible to plant solidarity, it's possible to plant hope. This is an experience, a beautiful service learning experience that has all the characteristics. These are nursing students that do their practices by offering training and healthcare to the families that are living in the refugee camps in the West Bank. They have no physicians, so these nursing students do everything so that women, mainly mothers, have the elements that are necessary to deal with basic healthcare situations, from a delivery to an emergency, a wound. When they obtain donations of insulin, for instance, they call the families that they know have diabetic children so they can help them treat them. So they are doing at the same time an extraordinary service with their community, and at the same time they are preparing themselves professionally to practice a profession that is so necessary right now in Palestine. So I wanted to start by presenting this experience that I think is a beautiful synthesis of what service learning is, and that is also a way of having our Palestinian colleagues here with us, as well as all the other places that are at war. I think it's also an experience that shows something that we very often say, that service learning is more than adding two components. And Furco said it's not the same thing as to put a blue and a red ball in a basket. The idea is to form a violet ball. My metaphor is perhaps more basic. It's not the same if for dinner I put a bowl of flour and a dish with cheese and tomato than if I offer a good pizza. The pizza is much more than the aggregation of ingredients. It's a combination, and as our colleagues from the Service Learning Center from Catalonia said, the integration of the service and the learning efforts transforms both components. You learn differently. You accompany the community in a different way. You don't study for the grades. You don't make collections to distribute anyway. You add value to the learning, and you add value to the service, and you create new educational qualities that are typical of this new combo that combines service and learning. So we can define service learning in many ways. Dewey said it's learned by doing together for the service of the common good. Freire would say it's reflection and action that transform reality. And we say that it's a project with the community. For us, service and solidarity, that word that we added to the original service learning from the 60s in the US, means a lot, because it's not just to do for others, but with others. It's led by students and articulated intentionally with the learning contents. And that is where we see the protagonism of each of you and us as educators. So these three characteristics, these programmatic characteristics of service learning, have to do with the integration of this new reality, of a unique reality that articulates, as Torrendell used to say, heart, hands, and heads. And when we speak of service learning, we speak of the projects, and it's legitimate to do so. We also speak of a methodology, because it's true that it's also a methodology. But mainly we're speaking of a pedagogy. It's a philosophy of education, a way of understanding how the educational institution is connected to the world, how we connect as teachers and as students to the world, more than that old bridging gaps, but recognizing ourselves as the bridge for the community and contribute from the production of knowledge and their practical application to, as the video that Jorge and Martín shared, to change the world from the school. Our co-national Pope Francis used to say, we are not going to change the world if we don't change education. And we say that with service learning, we can do both things at the same time. So, having done this introduction, I will now pass the floor to Ezequiel, so he introduces this panel formally.
Bueno, es un honor estar acá esta mañana.
It's an honor to be here on a sunny day after so much rain, and I would like to repeat what Secretary Torrendell said. He spoke of experience as something that is integral and essential for learning. And it resonates now that you mentioned Nieves, this phrasing by John Dewey that says, you don't learn just from experience, but from reflecting upon the experience. And the topic of this panel is precisely to reflect with two experts on the topic, to learn as teachers, as specialists about service learning, in order to provide better experiences for our communities. So with this, I'm going to tell you a little about the structure of the panel. We will have then Nieves Tapia. It's difficult to summarize her bio. She's one of the pioneers of service learning in Latin America, over 3 decades dedicated to the construction of the pedagogy of engagement and solidarity. As I said before, she was responsible for the National Service Learning Program at the Ministry of Education between 2000 and 2010, and she has supported institutionalization processes of this educational proposal in more than 20 countries. She has published more than 100 books and articles in several languages, and she's been a teacher in high school, secondary school, and several universities in Argentina. And also with us, Miquel Martínez, a professor of pedagogy at the University of Barcelona, a member of the founding team of the research team on moral education of that university. He has been the dean of the School of Pedagogy, director of the Institute of Education Sciences, and vice dean of the University of Barcelona. As a teacher and research, he has focused on educational values, democracy, citizenship, educational policy, and university policy. And he has participated as principal investigator in investigation projects, competitive both in Spain and internationally. Just to mention his most recent publications, Service Learning, a Key to Lead Transformation that is needed at education this year, and Training for a Participatory Citizenship. And what I think is very interesting about this combination of this pizza that Nieves brings is the voice of the South and the voice of the North, having this dialogue that cross the university world, civil society, how we can have these conversations that help us go deeper into our own experiences, because all of us here somehow have some experience on service learning. Let me just share the structure. We're going to have 20 minutes of presentation of each speaker, then we're going to have 3 questions that will take 10, 12 minutes, and then we're going to open the floor for the public to ask questions. So there will be assistants taking the notes of your questions so that we can all be heard. So without further ado, we pass the floor to Nieves. As you've seen, the title had to do with challenging times. I changed the title several times on this panel because we don't know if you call it desperate times or... But we prefer to assume the reality as a challenge. And I liked this extract from the UNESCO document on the futures of education because I thought that in a very few words it summarized some of the big challenges that we face today as humanity, from the widening of social and economic inequality to climate change, biodiversity loss, resource use that exceeds planetary boundaries, democratic backsliding, what they call the disruptive technological automation. All those are part, they say, the hallmarks of our current historical juncture. My youngest son inherited from me my disease, so he's a history teacher, and he always quotes the Chinese proverb that, you know, if it's a blessing or a curse, that tells you, I wish you interesting times. So we are living interesting times, challenging times, and thinking of the things that more directly affect the generation that is now in our classrooms, in our schools, in our universities, in higher education. We are living in a world full of trolls, and today you don't need you don't need to have read Tolkien to know what trolls are. Trolls are those that plant conflict, that plant confrontation in the social media. We are living in times where algorithms are like this echo camera, where perhaps unintentionally or not so much in our social media, we always come across those that share our tastes, our opinions, our hobbies, our ideas. And although this echo chamber seems to be expanding our world and we have friends all over the world, those thousands of likes and friends somehow, if we do not try and overcome the algorithm, enclose us in these echo chambers. So I chose this picture because I've been saying for a while that you have to be careful about deep fakes and manipulation of AI with images. But I saw in a friend's wall a story where Paul McCartney had gone to visit his old friend Phil Collins to sing for him as a farewell, that Phil Collins was dying in hospital, and Paul went there to sing Hey Jude to him. I was so touched by it. I'm a fan of Paul. And my sister is a fan of Phil Collins, also since very young. So I sent my younger sister this post that was so emotional. And my sister told me, it's fake. Come on, why don't you check your sources? So I wanted to share this bluff I did with my sister, because this can happen to any of us. And it's increasingly difficult to make a difference. When I studied history and they explained the sources to me, if a source was written and you had confirmed that that paper, the ink, belonged to that time, that was an authentic document. But how can you know that something you get from the internet is authentic? That's much more complex. And now we're going to see what this has to do with service learning.
Since this panel is focused on how service learning can educate citizens, I just wanted to share with you one of the many cases that became popular recently. Images were manipulated, but also the voices were manipulated. And this has led to videos, and it's very difficult to tell that they are fake. In the city of Buenos Aires, we held elections recently for the city's legislature. And the day before that Sunday, where we had to cast our vote, by law, we are not allowed to make any political announcements. But social media showed this video where a former president of Argentina, who is the leader of the opposition party to the incumbent party, in person announced at the very last minute that they would drop out and that everybody should vote for the list of candidates from the current president's party. There was no way to tell that this was not former President Macri himself, unless you check the social media accounts of his own party. But you have to make that effort. You have to take the time to double-check all the information. So in these challenging times, along the lines of what Torrendell was saying, we have always had technological innovations. The first big disruption caused by technology came with the printing press, and we couldn't and we don't want to prevent the printing press from being invented. AI is here to stay, and it is just taking its first steps. And in that regard, from a historical point of view, it's like the Industrial Revolution in its early days. Everything was new, there were no rules. And just like 8-year-old children had to work in mines and there were no regulations to determine how many hours they could work, now there are no laws to protect images, intellectual property, in light of this new technology. But this is not just an advancement or a threat. And it is not artificial at all, although we call it artificial intelligence. It is just another technology created by human beings. And underlying this technology, you have human beings with economic and political agendas. And it is not by chance that Elon Musk's AI, who is a migrating South African, would only talk about the white genocide in Africa whenever he was asked the question. So we need to educate the current generation for them to develop critical thinking. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. we will have a panel coordinated by Maria Rosa Tapia on how to use AI in service learning projects with concrete experiences. She is much more optimistic than myself because she's an expert on that. As a historian, I must say that it will take us a long time to tame this technology, for it to be a humane technology, just like it took us a long time for the capitalism from the first industrial revolution and from the second industrial revolution would recognize workers' rights and would allow us to have more decent working conditions. So, in this context, we share some challenges. We need to educate global citizens, although we might be living in times of xenophobia and brittle democracies. We need to educate on reflection and critical thinking in times of post-truth, and we need to educate service-oriented people in times of aggressiveness. That is something countercultural in education. We usually tell children in kindergarten that they have to share with their classmates that they cannot use four-letter words, that they shouldn't hit their classmates, and then we take anti-bullying measures, and then we see on the mass media famous people just doing the opposite. So we are still anti-cultural. But precisely because of that, today more than ever before, and this is something that we discussed at length last year, and I invite you to see the recordings from last year's conference, service learning is the education of the future. This is something that UNESCO says, because UNESCO says reimagining the future together, a future that doesn't take us to the end of humankind, requires learning and knowledge with a focus on solidarity and innovation. Our children need to learn how to work together and how to come up with common solutions to problems that affect us all. And we are responsible for them developing the skills and the knowledge they need in order to build sustainable futures for all. All this technological debate reminded me of Jeremy Rifkin's statement. He was a futurologist, quite popular at some time, and in the 1990s he would say that service learning is an essential antidote for a world that is increasingly isolated from virtual and simulated reality that children experience in the classroom, at home, in front of the TV or in front of their computers. And he would claim this before we had smartphones. Imagine that. So I think that the antidote is service learning. And today, more than ever, we are facing challenging times. So we need more service learning and better service learning. And I think that this means that we need to be careful. We need to make sure that our projects have the well-defined programmatic features. This is a project from Poland. Chemistry students at the university were studying antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Therefore, there are some diseases that are difficult to cure because of this resistance. So students looked at the behavior of this bacteria, and they wanted to know what was the level of spread of this bacteria in public spaces, especially where children usually play. So they took samples from all the parks in the city, and they analyzed the presence, or they looked for the presence of these bacteria. And they came up with a map of the city of Lublin in order to use together with the lab tests. So the students were the leaders in this project. They used their academic knowledge from their subjects, and they provided a service to the community. They provided the municipal government with a map identifying those contaminated parks. They provided some recommendations to improve cleaning in the parks, to prevent proliferation of these bacteria. And they also offered parents and the community as a whole concrete solutions to prevent parks from becoming a health risk for their children. So we need to have programmatic features very clearly defined, and we need to plan for the project as rigorously as possible. I don't want to take the time to go over the scheme because I know you know this diagram. The material is available on our website if you want to know more about that. But I just wanted to pause to delve into some aspects here. When students think about what they can do in their project, and I know some teachers already see these pictures and know where I took these pictures from. At a certain point, in times of AI and fake news and the post-truth, we need service learning projects that carry out a diagnosis of the reality, but that should be a well-founded diagnosis, taking the time to get data, to check the sources, to understand, to assess, to correctly interpret data. The photos at the top come from a school in Chubut, in the south of our country. They are contributing to reforesting burnt forest. Forests burn because there are some conspiracy theories saying that real estate agencies are trying to set the forest on fire because they want to use the land. And then, of course, we have the reality posed by global warming. So how can we help these students understand the reasons why this happens? And cause that reality that we are going to change. And then we have two other pictures that have to do with reforestation. Well, actually, it's afforestation. It's a planting of trees. Let me see if I remember the name. This is the Guayacum tree. The location is called Huachacan. There were only 8 trees of this Guayacum species. So the students of the agrotechnical school carried out a project to introduce more of these trees in order to recover the native flora in that area. So we need to be careful when doing diagnosis, and we need to be rigorous with the learnings that we connect to our service. Sometimes it is easier to serve as a volunteer than to to establish this connection with the academic content. Here you have the before and after pictures. This is in Córdoba, in the center of our country. There was this park. The city was celebrating its centennial, and the kindergarten school decided to renovate that stage by painting some murals. Mural painting can be a typical activity for a kindergarten school, but what I loved about this experience was that teachers planned the learning component quite rigorously. And before starting the project, they took the children to the Spilimbergo Museum. Spilimbergo is an Argentine artist who lived for many years in that area. So the staff at the museum taught the children the techniques to paint murals, and they did the first draft, the first blueprints, so that later on they could paint the walls with those murals. So you can be rigorous in learning, starting already from an early age, even more so in the primary and secondary school. I'm not going to go into the details of this experience because this picture is 15 years old, but one of the students in these pictures is now a teacher leading a project, and tomorrow she's going to tell us how they did research in their province in Tucumán, and there was a high mortality rate because of the bites of poisonous animals. So they took this project not only to schools, but also to the teachers training institutes for rural teachers. And we need also to be even more rigorous at the higher education level, where research and learning must create a virtuous circle with knowledge. I think that a sign of maturity of service learning is the emergence of novel micro-disciplines derived from service learning experiences. I'm thinking about the vets who carried out experiences in poor areas where they find horses with diseases that had never been investigated into because nobody had looked at those animals. Social dentistry as a discipline in itself that was created out of this initiative to provide dental care to poor people, architecture focusing on affordable housing. So these are new disciplines born out of service learning projects. In many cases, now there are different chairs at the university that take care of these topics. For those of you interested in higher education projects, this afternoon we will have a session here in this room about that. And I think this is a central issue. Ezequiel said that experience needs reflection. And I would say that right now, reflection needs to generate conversations that lead to common action. We need to learn to listen to opinions we don't like. That is a learning process that both adults and students have to go through. We need to listen to other people's opinions, not to counter those opinions, but just to understand those opinions. That is one of the most difficult skills that we need to develop in the present time. And we need also to learn to express our views, understanding that they are temporary, not walls that separate us forever. This is a type of learning that we can have as part of the reflection and dialogue around our service learning projects. I advise you to look at Guadalupe Nogue's videos. She's on TED TED Talks for Rio de la Plata. She has many videos on this, and she says, conversations and fire can fade away or go out of control. We learned to control the fire. We have to do the same with conversations. So with regard to our service learning projects, we need to generate conversations at schools, at the university, and in the community. Protecting freedom of speech or expression is easier than recovering it once we have lost it. And let me finish with a phrase that I used for universities, but I think that is applicable to all levels of institutions in education. There is a book that is called What Universities Owe Democracy. And the president of the Johns Hopkins University would say, citizenship education, the stewardship of facts, the cultivation of pluralistic, diverse communities. I think that these three elements are elements that we should take into account for quality service learning projects to be really the future of education. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Nieves. Y ahora le damos la palabra a Miquel.
Thank you, Nieves. Now, Miquel is going to take the floor.
¿Necesitas?
Buenos días a todos y a todas.
Good morning. First, I would like to thank CLAYSS, Nieves, Rosa, all those that are responsible, that have organized so many editions of this conference. Thank you for inviting me to participate. This is not my first time, but I'm happy. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Of course, with an audience like this, it's difficult to explain new things about service learning. Do not expect for me to discover things you haven't thought of before. But after the invitation from Nieves and the conversations we've had with Ezequiel, I thought it was timely to highlight some aspects in the slides I'm going to share now. You can read them afterwards. In each slide, I'm going to highlight some aspect that I think is particularly important. The objective of the topic would be, for me, how to see how service learning somehow can contribute, and in fact, service learning. We say service learning, but we know that in other countries they add the solidarity aspect to it. So to what extent service learning can contribute precisely to a citizenship that is much more participatory, more engaged, and more active. And I'm going to try and reflect around this objective from the lens of service learning. First, I'm going to show this slide that repeats some of the things that have been mentioned before that we are all aware of. And I'm going to highlight those that are particularly important. We know that we are in a current situation in the world, in a context, as was mentioned, of a lack of interest in the common good, an imperfection of democracy, a serious imperfection, in some moments very worrying in the past years, a strong decline of the responsibility of those that have been elected democratically to use power democratically. There's a kind of an oblivion that democracy is exerted democratically after being elected, and that is not happening in some cases. An important boom of authoritarianism because of the loss of trust in the policies, particularly in Western democracies, in the liberal democracies. And this has important aspects that sometimes we forget, because when there's this lack of confidence, it's not just from the ideological perspective, but also from a much more human perspective or social. For instance, as a consequence of the difficulty or the open inability of the governments elected democratically to solve the problems that are of the interest of the population, that discourages the population, and independently of the ideology. Because globalization and technologies and all we know as most recent developments have had a key impact on basic aspects for life. For instance, in basic issues related to employment, a society that doesn't have good jobs is a society that is the ideal part for problems. A society where the jobs are not taken care of, when there's no middle class that is satisfied with their jobs, if they don't have a possibility to have access to those jobs or to housing or to health, that society will hardly stay in a position that will allow them to move to a participatory democracy. And these are key enemies of the situation we are at now. And I think that we should bear this in mind, because I defend moving forward, but we have to move forward knowing the resources we have and the resources we have to counteract the effects of a society that right now is, as a result of this inability, is in a very easy situation for extreme positions, all those are contrary to democratic participation, that can speak of service learning, but they don't believe it. Well, the ultimate goal is that they are succeeding more easily than they would. This is not a convenient time. Even with some of you, I know we've met in other seminars. I'll give you an example to summarize the idea, maybe repeating the example. But just as we eat and we feed ourselves, we have a very poor diet in general, and dietitian, the experts, keep insisting that we should eat more healthy. We can stop insisting that we have to do certain things, although many follow a poor diet. And if we speak of this in terms of education, we have this attitude of resistance. That is something we have to integrate in our task as educators. This resistance is reluctance that is not an ideological resistance from the point of view of ideas. It's a resistance to facts that are becoming natural. It's no longer an ideology. It's the exercise of authority that is abusive by those that have been elected democratically but do not use their power democratically. The digital society and AI, mainly AI, the generative AI, is creating complex situations. I'm not going to mention the details, we've mentioned this, but I would like to insist on an aspect that I think we should bear in mind. The digital society and the current technologies offer new opportunities. New opportunities that are very important precisely for participation. And that's something that we should leverage in a smart way. I mean, we shouldn't be against that, because it's like being against cars when automobiles appeared. We should think that we are at a moment where increasingly the economy is collaborative, the scientific progress is increasingly the result of collective intelligence, it's not individual. We increasingly move from, or we may move from being less consumers to producers with technologies. People that would never have expressed their ideas now dare do it, and they're very creative, and perhaps they do it in silence or on their own, but they participate in a process. The digital tool makes it possible to participate. Actually, in some places, it's becoming, in both senses, both in favor or against an ideology, it's becoming the tool that is replacing political participation. It's becoming a new form of political participation. We can no longer think of participation as 20 years ago. We have to think of this as new opportunities that are very powerful and that make it possible for small groups, for minorities, to make their voice heard in global contexts. And we should also try this. So we have challenges for education that are very important, and we have to leverage on that. Now, as I said before, society in this time is not making it easy. Even the young population, in recent studies, they are showing that the youth have a concept about themselves that is very closed, very self-sufficient, a concept about the us that is very closed, and lack of confidence in those that are not known, just listening to the news we like or watching the channels that make it possible for us to be happy and not to, to escape the controversy, and a solipsistic concept of the self that is reduced to that, and ignoring the rest. So there's no concept, it's not that I believe everything. There are young people that are excellent, as well as there are excellent adults. But we are not going to have an immediate or spontaneous collaboration. Not all the youth are interested in participating, in part because they don't think it's good for anything. And that's the worst participation exercise, to give food to participation if it's good for nothing, if it's the best antidote to future participations. And we should bear this in mind when we open participatory pedagogical spaces. And service learning is an ideal space to enhance an authentic participation. But it's an ideal space to promote it. It's not guaranteed if we just apply a methodology. And I think we should be clear. There it is. In the first slide, it was a quick reflection, because I think we are all aware, we have a shared knowledge about where we are in the world. We all want an active and engaged society, but with what purpose? What is the purpose of education? But sometimes there are interesting speeches that agree on everything, but they don't explicit the purpose of education. For me, the purpose that I think we all share, I think it's very easy to share, that is based on two big objectives: to educate individuals with quality learnings, that is, reach optimum levels of quality in learnings at any point in the educational system. And second, to have and to create individuals that can appreciate the values of a democratic and inclusive society. These are things we can all agree on, but in practice they are not always together. The worst thing that can happen is that the world will end up again segregated between those that are skilled, with capacities for the market, etc., and good people. This separation is terrible, because evidently if they put you among the good people, you've lost the game. The world as it is, it's better to integrate these two visions in a very complete way. Not only complete, but from the point of view of us, we should be worried that both things should go together. And in what we are saying here, there's not just a task for educators and teachers, there's also a task for educational policies. It depends on the educational policy that is applied to make this easier or more difficult. It doesn't matter what effort educators do. And then I would also mention this, but we have to start thinking that what we have in front is not just our responsibility. It is our responsibility as teachers and educators, but it should be a co-responsibility with other agents, particularly political agents, of course, families that would be desirable, schools, but mainly we have to understand that there's a part of our work that we are responsible for, and another part where I have to demand and make others accountable. This will not come just from what we can do in the world of education. And sometimes I think that in the world of education, we think we have more responsibility than we actually have. But we're not the only ones that are responsible. We are responsible perhaps for generating more partnerships, to have more shared responsibilities. So we've discussed citizenship formation. What is the purpose of education? And we focused on those two big blocks. Also, when we speak of citizenship, we have to think of what kind of citizenship we are describing, because there are many. What we say is that should we move from a legal citizenship, I mean having rights, to a smart participatory citizenship, an engaged citizenship, what we call a critical thinking, a literate, scientifically literate citizenship that can understand scientific and technological processes in order to choose and to have a position, to understand the world economically, financially, because that is a space that if it's opaque, it can dominate us and make us almost illiterate in our decision-making, etc. I mean, a citizenship that is somehow illustrated with a cultural density. That's why when we mentioned before the issue of high-quality learning and social and democratic engagement, that is possible, but for that to be possible, or for that scientific literacy, we need to insist a lot on the cultural diversity of our educational proposals. And service learning allows that, because as you know, service learning, if it's well programmed and developed and systematized, should generate profound knowledge, not just a shallow knowledge. But that doesn't depend on the context of the activity, but on the attitude of the educator. If the educator is clear that that social engagement, ethical activity also wants it to be powerful to increase the cultural density of the student, then they will do some things. Otherwise, it will be a waste of time and of opportunity. So we should move to action, to citizenship action, social engagement, yes, but let's use that journey to make that knowledge dense, to make the understanding of the social situation, vulnerability, injustice, etc., dense. I mean, let's make our argument dense also for filing complaints. And as Nieves mentioned, today, of course, reflection is necessary. Ezequiel also mentioned that. Dewey interprets us. Dewey said we learn through experience. That is what he said, as Ezequiel mentioned. We learn from experience and by reflecting upon the experience. If we don't reflect, there's no learning. And that is important. We have to add to activism more rational elements. The idea of head, hearts, and hands. We have to bear that in mind. But we shouldn't forget the reason, because in order to recognize an injustice and report it and be upset at it, I need the knowledge to do it. Otherwise, I lose the argumentative quality in my discussion. I lose the quality to participate in a debate, in a discussion, and to force decision-making in a group. And this is a point that then we can think of an elementary school student, but the objective is not for them to learn what happens in a garden, but to think about the things they see, to integrate in their heads this idea of reflection as a way of approaching reality. But we are seeing a way of approaching reality in many people with different intellectual levels. This is not a question of education, that is very shallow, is that they move around and just look, and others analyze. In the service learning experiences that are also motivational, we shouldn't lose that. It's essential to consider that needs and then move to action. I mean, Nieves mentioned this as well. In our working group, Maria Puig, I'm sure you read from him, an excellent friend. He published a recent work on pedagogy that is very important to understand many of the things I'm mentioning now. And those are key elements to see how we will move from a situation of basic reflection that is necessary of cultural density to have critical thinking, but not just that. We should move to action and to shared action, doing together. And that doing together is easier if we can use the new technologies. New technologies, well, it's no longer new technology, digital technologies. It's more possible to do it together. And it's more engaging doing it together than alone. So it has motivational aspects that are also interesting. And something that is also to be highlighted is the aspect of participation as such. Participation or engagement is somehow a factor of learning. Everybody knows the importance of engagement as the importance of citizenship training, but there may be many kinds of engagement. The thing is that we should highlight one type of engagement that may lead to an authentic, participatory, active citizenship. This means let's move away from participation or engagement situations just as the one that is there not generating anything. Let's move away from purely consultative engagements. We should move further. We should generate more projective engagement opportunities, saying what they would do, and even review the participation mechanisms. Meta-participatory, I mean, engagement should not just be a debate and an opinion, and of course it should always be accompanied by accountability. So whatever has been agreed, whatever has been done together, then you have to account for that, what difficulties there have been. Well, you're aware of all this. Service learning. In this context that I have explained, citizenship, the importance of reflection, cultural density, service learning, in our opinion, and I think we share this, is an educational paradigm. I mean, it forces us to rethink education. We all know it can contribute to the educational transformation, contribute to integral education. This is not new. But I would highlight two aspects here. First, that it can contribute to the educational transformation that is necessary today. This is an important element for me. It can be a factor, a tractor for change in education, but not just in education from the social and ethical perspective, but education in itself. It can be, and it is, in some places, in some institutions, a factor for leading a change. And I think that sometimes we don't use that enough. In our perspective, in educating in values, in the research we do, we say, well, service learning has allowed us to move from value-based education as stimulation to value-based education in terms of stimulation. Perhaps it's the same as we discussed 10 or 20 years ago, but there's a new factor there that promotes action.
Why do we claim that this is a paradigm? For reasons that you are familiar with, because it leads to deep learning, because it also allows you to have collaborative learning, all the different elements that are listed here and are well known to you. But let me focus on the last two. Service learning projects and activities and service learning as a paradigm incorporated into education creates authentic participation spaces immediately. if the schools and the institutions have service learning as a paradigm, they are convinced of the fact that not only their projects will be impacted, but also their own concept of education will be impacted. And here it does something that is not so easy in education. It generates intrinsic motivation. We know that in human activities, we have external and internal assets or goods. When you do an activity, you can have access to some internal assets like excellence or external assets like good salary, good prestige, and both are legitimate, but sometimes we forget about the internal ones. So, when you practice service learning, you have some internal benefits that come from that very same service learning activity. There is a reward, and I think that this needs to be taken into account in order to make the most of service learning, so that service learning as a project is not just a participation space for students that provides them with satisfaction, but nothing more than that. And in closing, I think that my time is up, right? Let me convey to you a few ideas, a few final remarks, because you have the slides available. So these are some final considerations that actually are a summary of what I've said during my presentation. We have moved from a moment where we feel outraged and towards a more hopeful attitude. I think that there is resistance, action, but we need to not to be naive, but we need to convey this feeling of hope to the younger generations. This is essential. Therefore, when we talk about historical memory, we tend to refer to what happened in the past, but we should also include what it has happened in recent years. Illiteracy rates have gone down in the world. Feminism has grown all over the world. Now we see imperfect democracies, but there are more democracies than before. Wars, in some cases, have increased, but the attitude towards weapons and war has changed towards a positive direction. Some people claim that the past days, the old days, were better than the present days, but that is no longer valid. Now we have good news of what is happening in the world. If we have human action, transformation, this has some facts, and this is part of the historical memory. The younger generations need to know that if they act, they can make changes, and conveying this is extremely important, and service learning contributes to this because they can see the outcome and improvements. Finally, I think that we need to insist from our own places that we as educators have a certain responsibility, that service learning projects can lead to a new educational paradigm, but politicians must be aware of the fact that speeches are just speeches and that actual practices and public policies are the ones that can create good jobs, non-segregating attitudes in the education system, equal conditions for access to education and health. And if that doesn't happen, then we will have the responsibility to report that. But let's bear that in mind. Thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Nieves. Muchas gracias, Miquel.
Thank you, Nieves. Thank you, Miquel. In your binders, you have received some sheets of paper where you can write down your questions. So You can write them down and we will collect them. But after all these comments about the relevance of citizenship education in these challenging times, as described by Nieves and Miquel, my question to you is, how can we view today the central role of citizenship education, what it means to have active education without without going into indoctrination? So how can we sort out that dilemma, the juncture? Well, I can make two comments out of many. I would like to reinforce what Miquel was saying. Many of you may recall when Juan Carlos Tedesco, a great Argentine and Latin American educator, in this conference talked about how citizenship education has to be rooted in scientific literacy, because the problems that we discuss about require more knowledge, not just managing emotions, what I like, what I don't like, what I'm fond of, the people that I don't like. So I think that both Miquel and myself have insisted on the need to have serious people and who know what they need to know so that they can become good citizens. And secondly, in Argentina, the issue of indoctrination has been raised in different places. In fact, there is a hotline where parents can report on those teachers that, in their view, are indoctrinating their children. Those of us who have worked in civic education all our lives feel that that is quite difficult. How can you explain in the classroom how the different powers in government operate and why they have to be separate and independent? But we were talking about the need to learn how to have a conversation. And this is also applicable to the dialogue between students and teachers. We should be capable of listening to our students, even when they tell us things that really outrage us. I worked on a book. I contributed to a chapter to that book, and I found a group of young people, very young people, with clearly fascist arguments, something that I thought that had disappeared. And they complained about what we had written, not because they have read it, but rather because a newspaper that they usually read talked about that work. I found it quite difficult, I must admit, to listen to those young people raising those old arguments, but I understood that for them that was their truth. So as an educator, I have to start the dialogue. I have to ask them why they thought like that. So I think that it's not just a matter of imposing the direction, but rather to have conversations. And this takes me back to the roots of service learning. Democracy is a participatory sport. And you don't learn to play a sport just sitting in a classroom reading a manual or the rules. You have to go to the pitch. The beauty of service learning is that we educate citizens today and for the future in the field of reality. And this is why we take a stake for a non-purely normative citizenship education. I fully agree with what Nieves has just said. Service learning allows us to do this, and this is central, of course. But, of course, we need to think that you cannot learn to participate if you don't participate, and you cannot learn how to be a smart or reflective citizen if you do not participate in certain spaces. So from an early age, we should work on developing agency, the children's ability to have agency, the possibility of having an opinion, formulating an opinion, developing, promoting agency at an early age in life, and promoting their participation already as citizens from a very early age is extremely important. It's not just about educating citizens when they become citizens. They have to start much earlier. So the question here that I raise is, for how long have we listened to a child with the same interest and the same respect as we would listen to an adult, without interrupting them? How much time do we devote to listening to children's opinions without interrupting them? There are like 3 basic conditions everywhere to develop agency. One, the individual has to be accepted, has to feel accepted as a person, and the person has to feel loved, and then it has to there have to be some rules that grant trust, especially in a democracy. So accepting the individual is important. It doesn't mean that you agree with everything that person does. It is quite different to accept an individual than to say that what the person is doing is wrong. One thing is to tell a child that he is a fool, and another thing is that he has done something that is foolish. So these are 3 small elements that can allow a young person and an adult to be capable of doing, having agency, having power over what they are doing. This is not enough for participation. Then we should also create the spaces. But if we don't have this condition there, then indoctrination is easier. Anyway, there are very few things on which I would try to establish some direction. Climate change and inclusion. If this planet cannot sustain itself, and if there is no inclusion, then we are doomed to fail. We can't have we have to have a more warlike attitude there. We have to be convinced that those should be esteemed values and values that are practiced. But this doesn't mean that we can't listen to different opinions. When you are in this belligerent attitude, you may have a discussion, you may have an argument, we may exchange ideas, why you think that climate change is not a problem, why these news are fake, and then we can have a pan on words, we can talk about inclusion, everybody uses the term inclusion, but how do you put it into practice? You have the most liberal and conservative positions about inclusion. Diversity is understood as a tolerant attitude. Then you can move towards the most Republican attitudes, where you have a society that is being built. So inclusion is a driver for building society. So I would be a more moralizing person, but quite open. So I would say, well, I will defend this, I will advocate this, but if this is not achieved, well, I just want that other person to have agency, not...
Gracias. Bueno, el tema de la formación de ciudadanía surge en las preguntas.
Citizenship education is a topic that is raised in several questions, and let me go on along these lines, because I think that this is quite important. What is the role of schools as institutions to promote active citizenship?
El año pasado usé una frase de
Last year, I used a statement from one of the founders of the Italian Republic saying that the school is the only institution that can turn a servant into a citizen. And I think there are only a few institutions that today are actively engaged in educating citizens, because the university also considers that their students are already citizens, so they don't worry about that. So I think that that is unique responsibility that challenges us to examine how we operate as institutions, because sometimes we are not fully democratic, but it also challenges us as educators to examine the kind of relationship that we establish with our students and what relationships our students are allowed to have with the reality, with the community, and with the possibility of having an experience when they are 4-year-old citizens or when they are 17-year-old citizens. Perhaps thinking about the experience in Latin America, our citizenship education programs were more rooted in learning the rules. I used to work as a teacher when we were in a dictatorship, but anyway, I had to teach students on the different excerpts of the Constitution. It was like doing science fiction at that time, but we have to move from that discursive, normative type of education towards a more civic education that takes the students to the field of reality, to the pitch of reality, where we can have the necessary conversations that perhaps are not happening in the family or in other spaces. Yes, I also believe that school plays a very important role. And in my opinion, our society should be more proactive to strengthen the schools. Schools have to be strengthened. Otherwise, we lose a significant space for citizenship. The school is one of the few places that is still there that can generate the sense of belonging. You can't have the sense of belonging in the world of labor. Think about Senett's philosophy about character formation. I'm not an advocate of extreme character formation because I'm not fully convinced of all the principles, but it is true that this sense of belonging is essential in order to have citizenship. So one of the few spaces where the government can have you, to be honest, well, it's the school, but the family won't be able to do that. Neither the world of labor have people in the same place for so many years. Families do not, nor families have the same level of stability that they used to have. Children don't develop the sense of belonging in their relationships. So there is some liquidity. The only protected space that can still exist, and it is quite free because it is like a lab, like a sandbox, is the school. So we need to strengthen the school for many reasons, but this one mainly. But also creating that sense of belonging means rethinking the school, and service learning is very useful in this sense, with 3 legs. Here, I wouldn't talk about the classical 3 legs, but reason, feeling, and will. This has already been said by Zubiri long ago. The school has always worked on the reason component. Emotions not always, but feelings have been worked on. But it still has to work better on the front of will. It has to focus on will. Otherwise, you don't have a community, you don't have citizenship. It means renouncement. It means not just looking at your own particular interests, but also looking at your interests considering that it doesn't go against the common good. So educating in solidarity means that that the individuals have to be ready to accept what is opposite to what they do or what they believe. When things are easy, you can practice solidarity all day long. But when you have jobs or public services at risk, or taxes are involved, the redistribution of the economic policy in a country, if you don't have that kind of education so that you can deal with those difficulties, then you will be in trouble. So the school is basic, is fundamental. It's not just because technology is going to replace school. Of course, when used properly, technology and intelligence help you deal with these topics. You will have more time to devote to these topics because you can make a more efficient use of your time. This requires a completely change of mindset. So we need to change the focus of the school, and we need to reinforce the school. And it is there where service learning comes into play. I remember we had a publication about this. Service learning can have a more comfortable space because it wouldn't be struggling with hard content. The soft content would become more important. Perhaps I'm too optimistic, but of course, one thing, it is not the same to put it into practice than to say it. It is easier said than that. Now, going back to citizenship education, in the context of a citizenship education with cultural density, what can be the role of arts as a driver of social change? This is quite a generic question. I think that art can have different dimensions. Well, I wasn't expecting the question. Okay, that is a question from the floor. Okay, yes, I wasn't expecting that question. We haven't planned for that. I think that there are two important dimensions in art. As I mentioned, the willingness, we speak about writing and reading, but not the visual language. So there are many aspects that have to do with participation, empathy, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, having dialogue and accepting different positions. And if you just focus on the domain of reading and writing, that will not be enough. In the nonverbal communication, you have visual expression through arts that you can use to convey messages that do not necessarily have to be understood in the classical way. And they can perfectly contribute to a different type of dialogue. As I also believe that music, arts in general have a lot of power to bring peoples together. But I think that arts open up a space, and in view of a conflict, or when you try to establish some level of agreement, when you want to build together, if you don't have art, I think it might be more difficult. Proof of that is that people who have developed this dimension more than others are people who, in my opinion, are capable of putting themselves in somebody else's shoes at ease. However, I think that it has to be attached a more important role. But that is because we also lack that kind of component in our own education. We have teachers who were trained under different circumstances. So here we have a deficit, and it's not easy to deal with it. Of course, if somebody comes up with a curriculum and say that this is enough, well, that will be wrong. There needs to be a change. Just let me make a commercial here. In our website, you can find a manual on service learning in arts. We have a Latin American program on dealing with service learning in arts. And I think that at present, art also allows us to express identities at the individual level, but also at the level of the people and cultural identities, something that you don't have in school. The ways in which new generations express themselves apply more to the visual components than to the writing and reading components. So in that regard, I think that there is a new deployment of arts, and adults do not recognize that so often. We are not Leonardo da Vinci, but at the audiovisual level, there is an artistic expression from younger generations that schools need to interpret and understand. What you have said is very important, because actually what we lack is the teachers' preparation or training to deal with all these tools. I have seen the use of audiovisual tools that have been excellent, but I was still judging the use of those tools from the traditional ways. Now they have a more powerful expression ability. All right, thank you. As usual, it was a pleasure. I would keep this conversation forever, but let me close by just conveying to you a takeaway from this panel. Information doesn't change behaviors. That is what Miquel said. Torrendell mentioned experiences with reflection. You talked about reflection and also rigor in our experiences. And I think that solidarity-based service learning has to do with this, with rigor, with experience, with reflection. And the second takeaway is that while technology and algorithms try to make us feel comfortable just listening to ourselves, service learning can create some discomfort. And as teachers, perhaps our role will be to sustain and promote that discomfort, this cognitive conflict from a pedagogical aspect, but in the social domain. So perhaps our role in future years as teachers is to maintain this discomfort in order to generate more learning. Thank you. It was a pleasure to have you.